time of growing walls. Blessed are those who strive for expertise, patience, perspective, honesty, and judgment in a time of fake news, sound bites, and echo charms. I will not continue on your favorite part, which is fascinating and inspiring, but without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you Mr. Tom Fletcher, CFG, who was a British ambassador to Lebanon between 2011 and 2015, and the Down Street Foreign Policy Advisor to 3 prime ministers. He is honorary professor at the International Relations at University of New York. He belongs at the Naked Diplomat. He is currently leading a report on the future of the United Nations and the new UN Secretary General. Given the aspiration of Asma for every year to have a diversity, for this year, her idea was to have a wide range of a spectrum of topics to cover. For a literature salon where they discuss novels and poetry and literature, I saw a diplomat with a book on the era of digital and how that will enhance, change, support the role of the UN and the Security Council in the coming year. And for me, it was great. This is a good opportunity to challenge, because basically I don't have to be the devil's advocate, because I am. But for me, coming from the field, from the front line, and literally arriving just 48 hours ago, where I experienced firsthand the failure of the UN system, I would like to challenge you in your theory, in your book, in your report, and to what extent that will lead us if in the part of humanitarian response, the organization is facing great challenges, how that look like when it comes to the bigger picture of the political side of things. So I will let you start your book, and then we will continue. And to make it also extremely interesting for everyone, I would like to go with him into his personal experience in Lebanon as an ambassador. Not only an ambassador, but the youngest ambassador in the last 200 years of the kingdom of the United Kingdom. So I think it's fascinating to have you here. Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along on a Saturday afternoon on such a lovely sunny day. Maybe that's where we should start then. We should start with the UN, as you've been deliberately provoking me on the UN. I have to disappoint you a little bit and say that I'm not a great defender of the UN in its current setup, which was why really I wanted to do this report on how technology can make the UN deliver more effectively the mandate that we all need it to deliver. And my bio is a little bit out of date actually, because when we say currently working on a report, we delivered the report last week in New York. And so it's topical, and so it's a good place to start. One of the things that I've been saying to the UN is that for most people outside of the moment, the UN is failing comprehensively. As you say, you've seen it in the field. The UN is stacked with amazingly dedicated, committed, passionate people who are global citizens and believe in partnership and cooperation and are working on this range of missions, from peacekeeping to humanitarian to the politics. Really important stuff. But collectively it's not working. And you've seen that yourself. I saw it often in Lebanon, where there are 29 UN agencies. I used to say to the Lebanese, there are too many political parties here, it's too divided. And they'd say, but there are 29 UN agencies. We only have about 19, so that's it's not so far out. And those UN agencies were brilliantly led. There was some amazing people, but there was a huge amount of overlap and difficulty in delivery. And this really represents failures across diplomacy as a whole. The greatest example of that in our recent experience is, of course, Syria. Syria is what happens when the international system fails, when the UN Security Council is paralyzed. But when I go around talking about these issues, people also say, well, why do we need diplomacy anymore when states are getting so much weaker? And when so much of the power is now shifting to Google and Facebook and Apple, surely those organizations should be represented at the UN. They say technology is making diplomacy irrelevant. So you've got the problem of Syria as an example. You've got the threat of disruptive technology, which can move much faster than your average diplomat. And then you have the phenomena, something like Donald Trump or Brexit, closer to my home, suddenly hitting us from the side. And people say, well, if you diplomats, one of your jobs is to analyze what's going to happen and anticipate it, prepare for it. Where were you preparing for Donald Trump, and where were you preparing for Brexit? So my business of diplomacy is really under attack. But one of the things I was trying to do in New York last week, I tried to do a report on the British Foreign Office this time last year, I tried to do it in my book, is to make the case for why, in the midst of these challenges, diplomacy matters more than ever. If diplomacy didn't exist, we have to invent it. But now we have to reinvent it. We have to find ways to use these new tools to connect with people more effectively, to help the UN solve these problems.
The margin of maneuver that you have a system which is so old, so heavy and complicated that it's failed to drag itself, which is the UN system today. It's difficult, it's so old that it cannot cope anymore with these new advances, new technologies is coming. On the other hand, you have a technology which is moving very fast, faster than you and your career. And in between these two, how you will find the margin of maneuver for diplomacy to still work effectively?
So one thing I think is very important to say is that there's a vast majority of the diplomatic craft which survived the fax machine. People said you can replace the British Foreign Office with fax. It survived the arrival of television. It survived the arrival of horseback travel or train. There's a lot of this which is about human interaction and what we call the last 3 feet. That point at which diplomats work together to understand other individuals, other cultures. But I believe that technology can also enhance that. In Lebanon, I was often marooned in my house, almost held hostage in my house for security reasons. And anyone who is from Lebanon or knows Lebanon knows some of those challenges. There were times I couldn't leave the house. And this gave me the means to suddenly connect with vast parts of the population that I would never otherwise have been able to connect with. In Lebanon, as a British ambassador, you're actually not allowed to speak to various parties. You can probably work out which ones, which one. Again, this allowed me to speak to the constituency, to try and get my message across, to connect with people, to challenge people's preconceptions about what it meant to be the UK or the West or a British ambassador. And so it really does open up huge possibilities. We have no choice but to be digital or dead, because that's what everyone else is doing.
Don't you think you are overrating the role of technology or digital era if we know that, or if we take into consideration the difference between having access to it and knowing how to influence through it the status quo and the change?
So that's where we're losing at the moment. The big dividing line, I believe, for the 21st century, whether it's Donald Trump, Brexit, or any of the other trends that we're seeing at the moment, is between people who think that the answer to all the challenges of the 21st century is to build a bigger wall and separate ourselves off, and the people in rooms like this, diverse rooms, people who care about culture, care about sharing ideas, care about creativity and curiosity. The bridge builders on the other side. But that's not a new divide. That's been the divide ever since my favourite ever diplomat, who in the book I call Ugg. He's the first prehistoric man who persuades the other cavemen to put down their clubs stop killing each other and go hunting together. That is the basic essence of what we do as diplomats. And that remains the essence of everything we do as diplomats. It's accelerated. It's become more important than ever after this kind of roller coaster year of 2016, when basically an election for leader of the free world created a vacancy for leader of the free world, when China emerged as the defender of the Davos consensus, and when the German leader emerged as the most important barrier against right-wing extremism in Europe. It's extraordinary.
I find it fascinating when you quote the visit of JFK to NASA, and the cleaner was wiping the stairs, and he asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm putting a man in the moon," which is the whole idea of to have the buy-in from all the members of the organization in the values, objectives, and principles of the organization so they can lead it. Do you think that after we deliver your report last week, that the UN system will have this capacity to get the buy-in from different members?
It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a huge organization, and it's very divided between these different agencies. As you said, I do think the most important thing for any organization, the UN, British Foreign Office, the UAE government, any organization, is to have a really strong sense of purpose. And when JFK asked the guy sweeping the steps, "What are you doing?" he said, "I'm putting a man on the moon." He knew what he was there for was not just to sweep the steps. He was putting a man on the moon. And I think any organization needs to know those people can do that. I'm pretty confident, putting this to the test, that at my embassy in Beirut, if you'd arrived, I used to say the most important person was a security guard, the first person you met. By the time you got to my office, you'd been waiting in security queues, you were pretty fed up. Those were the guys that shaped your impression of the embassy. And I'm pretty confident you can turn up at that embassy and say, "Why are you here?" And that guy would say, "I'm here to promote Lebanese stability." Because that's what we were there for. That's what we were doing 24/7. That's what really drove us. And I hope that the report helps the UN to do that.
I do hope. I still, as I said to you, I remain skeptical about the possibility. As we said, the machine is too big. There is different also factors which is work at the same time to hinder if other factors are supporting any development in the organization itself. Now I would like to shift to your life in Lebanon, not only as a young diplomat, but also as a foreign person living in the Middle East. What is your funniest experience? What do you feel that had been difficult to deal with at the time? Does people take you seriously all the time? But for us, age is so important. How being young contributed to put more challenges in your mission as a diplomat?
Wow, it's a tough question, and probably I couldn't give you a very objective answer. Is anyone here from Lebanon?
Lebanese, the hands up.
Can you help me answer that one? I don't know. I don't know whether Lebanese people took me less seriously because I was a bit younger.
Hi, it's a pleasure meeting you. When we receive usually ambassadors, counselors from foreign country in Lebanon, they are usually in their mid-50s, 40s. I don't think the Lebanese I'm not trying to defend or being biased now, but the idea of seeing a gentleman like you occupying a post, such a post for Britain and Lebanon, it's such a big thing for them. Maybe by the time you proved yourself, I'm sure they find you serious and they find you working for the country as a foreign affair intelligent and with the United Nations. I'm sure you left an impression among us Lebanese and Lebanon. But we live with a stereotyped image. That's why you get this impression.
So basically, an older man will get it for granted or less challenging than you.
So I did. I mean, certainly early on, I was very conscious that sometimes I'd arrive in a meeting and someone would say, "Oh, when's the ambassador arriving?" You look around and they'd assume you were there just to prepare the meeting. But the wonderful thing about a place like Lebanon is it's a very small ecosystem, so you get known very quickly, and people judge you on your character and your delivery of your objectives. And so I hope it didn't last too long. It's also, I think with any of these jobs, there's a great line, if anyone watches The West Wing, there's a line in that where the president says, you don't learn the presidential voice, you earn the presidential voice. And I felt there was a moment for me, I stepped off the plane with my then 3-year-old son, and a long plane journey with a 3-year-old, you're not looking your smartest, your most elegant, and I just walked off the plane and saw my, big army of bodyguards and staff, and you suddenly realise that you're the ambassador, and you realise that comes with a huge responsibility, particularly in a challenging security environment, and you've got to get on with it. You don't have the time or the luxury of having too much debt. You've got to crack on.
In 4 years, between 2011 to 2015, which I think it had been the most critical period also in the whole region history, not only in Lebanon, what are the changes that you witnessed in these 4 years? Definitely it's huge, but what are the main milestones that you can mention?
So absolutely, on several levels, a period of immense change for the region. But for Lebanon in some ways, many things stayed the same, believe it or not. And actually, that was a result, given the context we were in, and particularly the Syria context. I mean, if you look at a map or a history book, you can understand how connected Lebanon and Syria really are, and how the assumption is that anything that happens in Syria will have a huge impact on Lebanon. And I saw our job as to defend Lebanon from that spillover, from the Syria crisis. And that spillover was huge. There was a security spillover, there was violence coming across the border, there was a political spillover in terms of the sectarian divides getting firmer and harder, and there was a human spillover, literally. 1 in 3 people in Lebanon, at least, is now a Syrian refugee. And so in response to that, I felt we had to get the politics right, we had to be in there non-stop, basically showing that, particularly among the Big 5 Security Council members, that there was a consensus that Lebanon had to hold. We had to keep Lebanon stable. Then I felt we had to show the Lebanese population that they weren't just victims of this crisis, that we would rehabilitate their schools, that we would make sure that every kid in Lebanon had their school books, for example, so that they weren't feeling they were just paying the cost the whole time for hosting refugees. And then, perhaps most importantly, I felt we had to stand up the Lebanese border. Now, anyone who's travelled up that border knows it barely exists. And we had to work very, very fast with the Lebanese army, with the US military as well, to build watchtowers along that border, so that when Daesh hit the border in 2014, July 2014, they thought they were hitting nothing. They thought it would be another border they could smash through. And instead they hit Lebanese army troops trained by the Brits, equipped by the Brits, and they were knocked back. There was a really important moment when they were turned around. And that for me was the most important moment of what we did in those 4 years.
You've mentioned the relation between the two sides of the border, between what's going on in Syria and how everybody was striving to keep Lebanon from being so affected. To what extent the communication and similar point of view have been exchanged between the diplomatic community and the Big 5, between in Lebanon and in Syria, and how effective that was in reaching your objectives in keeping Lebanon safe?
So let's be frank, we failed utterly in Syria as the Big 5. Now, we can argue, I'm quite happy to argue about who bears the most responsibility for that failure. It won't surprise you to know that I don't blame the UK or the US most of all for that, but there's a collective failure. We failed to find the necessary consensus in the Security Council. And that had a very direct implication for me in Lebanon, because our embassy in Damascus had to leave Damascus and was housed inside my embassy. So we were running our Syria policy from within my mission. But I do think we did a good job on that day, actually. I spent as much time with my Russian colleague as with my American colleague or my French colleague. We worked incredibly hard to hold the consensus around Lebanese stability in New York through the humanitarian effort, but especially on the ground. And we were very lucky to have a whole series of very committed, passionate diplomats who were determined not to let Lebanon go backwards.
I can go on and ask questions, but I would like to give the chance and open the floor because it's a very interesting topic. And with a very interesting young diplomat who had been with us during a very critical time of period between 2011 and 2015. So the floor is yours.
Everyone's watched the humanitarian crisis, and there was a point where the refugee problem in Lebanon, Jordan, coming out of Syria was almost catastrophic. Are we past that tipping point? Has that stabilized? Is that still an existential threat, or at least a serious threat to those nations? How do you see that playing out?
It's a really important question. I don't think it has stabilized. I quoted that figure earlier on of 1 in 3 people being a refugee in a country like Lebanon that already has very fragile infrastructure. Similar figures in Jordan and Turkey, not quite such a high proportion, but a larger number of refugees. It's unimaginable what that would do to a country. Imagine, 1 in 3 people in Britain or America being a refugee. Donald Trump would be the least of our worries in that context. You would see a huge backlash. Our societies wouldn't be able to cope, to be honest, politically with that. So it has put a massive strain on the countries of the region, and now, of course, on countries beyond that. And I fear that as long as Bashar al-Assad is able to continue to terrorize his people in this way, those numbers will only rise. The idealist, the optimist in me would say, we know the war's ended. The other wars have all ended at some point. And so there will be a time when our collective effort can go into helping the refugees return home and rebuild their country. But it doesn't feel like we're any closer to that now than we were when I was in Beirut. And so an aspect of this which I feel very passionately about is the education angle. So one of the things I do is run a plan to try and get 1 million Syrian kids into education who are currently not in school. And you imagine a million children, 1 million Syrian children. Imagine them in 10 years' time as writers and poets and teachers and doctors, or imagine those 1 million kids without that education. And if you're in Europe, there isn't just a moral dimension to this, there's a very practical dimension to this, which is that these 1 million kids are coming in our direction, and they're either going to come with education, or they're going to come hungry and angry and marginalized. And so the Europeans in particular have a special responsibility for trying to respond. But again, coming back to your UN point, what we've realized is the UN can't cope with those numbers, and it's not their fault. In my first week in Beirut, I was with my fantastic colleague who ran the refugee effort. And she said, we can cope up to the point at which we have 10,000 refugees. 2 years later, we had 1 million. It's no surprise that a machine built for 10,000 refugees cannot cope with 1 million. And so we have to find new ways of helping to get education to these kids. And so the model we're pioneering, I won't spend too long on this, is to get businesses more involved. So if you need a school built, we will go to the engineering companies to build it. If you need the paint for the school, we'll go to the paint companies. If you need internet, we go to Facebook to provide the internet. If you need the tablets, we go to Microsoft. We go to Pearson to put the educational content on the tablets. We go to Uber to provide the transport plan. It's a very different model for getting these kids education. You can't always get the kids to school, but you can get the school to the kids.
To have the system working, to decentralize it. That means the field need to have the upper hand in taking the decision and allow this to be implemented. Otherwise, to wait for the whole system to validate, and you know how it is in the UN, then you will kill the project and the bureaucracy rather than under practicality.
Exactly right. I mean, I think just one example is this in Saida, in southern Lebanon. And I went to meet women who'd been victims of sexual violence and who were being helped through a British project. And I said, is anyone helping you? And they said, no one's helping. I said, well, what about this project? They said, this project's amazing. But that's the local NGO is doing the project. And I went to the local NGO and said, who's giving you the money? And they said, a big NGO. I went to the big NGO and said, who's giving you the money? And they said, the UN. Great. Who's giving the UN the money? The EU. Who's giving the EU the money for this project? The British. And it turned out that our money had gone through 7 layers before it got to those women who so badly needed it. And every layer, you know what it's like, had marked each other's homework, done assessments, all good stuff, all very thorough. But by the time it arrives, you know, it doesn't have the impact it should have. So I do believe that the model for financing humanitarian work in the future is going to change. We're in this world where anyone can, you know, with a click of a button, order a book on Amazon, get the pizza delivered. It's a much more human-centered model. And I believe that's where humanitarian work is heading. What I would love is a model where if you personally wanted to help the Syrian refugee crisis, education crisis, and you came to me, I wouldn't say just donate some money to an NGO or lobby your government to give more resource. I'd say, well, what can you do? What's your skill? You might say, I'm a retired geography teacher. And I'd say, great, we're going to connect you by Skype with a school in the Bekaa Valley that needs a geography teacher. And you're going to teach a class once a week. That is a much more, I think, exciting, empowering, practical way of bringing individuals into the effort. And I think people would be more willing and more excited about helping in that situation.
I have a question. While serving as an ambassador, British ambassador in Lebanon, and whatever relates to humanitarian efforts, especially with the Syrian refugee and education and health, fair, aware, and everything, how much of power did you have over your decisions? Were they like personal, coming up from you, or were they driven from the government? I mean, that was very interesting. I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, it's a very relevant question. It depends, to be honest, where you are. One of my great sources of guidance, mentoring really when I was there, was a former head of UK Special Forces. So a guy who kind of knew his way around. And he used to turn up every now and again, surprise me. Literally, sometimes he'd come over my wall. He'd go past my bodyguards and come in and be sitting on my terrace having a cup of tea when I came down in the morning. And he would say, proceed until apprehended. Basically meant just get on with it. I was lucky in that because I'd worked in Downing Street, it was assumed in my own system that I had more cover, more autonomy than I really did. And so I was able to proceed until apprehended and take risks, especially on social media, where I took some I pushed it into some fresh space. You know, when we wanted to highlight the issue of the treatment of domestic workers, there was no point in me giving a speech or writing an article because, you know, an ambassador writing an article, no one really was going to read it. I became a domestic worker for the day and cleaned the bathroom, made the tabbouleh. The photos went viral. It led the news that night. The next day, Kalkida Nagusi, the Ethiopian lady who'd shown me how to do her job, did my job. And she was on primetime TV, speaking very eloquently about how people should treat outsiders with more dignity and with more respect. You know, I didn't ask anyone in London. I didn't ask anyone in London if I should do that. So, proceed until apprehended was definitely the rule. it's easier somewhere like Lebanon than it would have been in Brussels or Washington.
Thank you, Your Excellency. How are you? My question is, what are the aspects that you mentioned in your book can be applied for United Arab Emirates foreign policy and diplomats, and what cannot be applied? Thank you.
Well, you know.
I want the answer.
One of the things I've taught, I've tried to teach the class EDA is how to avoid answering difficult questions. So you'll catch me when I try and do that. This is like hard talk. Yes, whatever you do, don't watch my hard talk appearance. I got completely killed there. Anyway, I'm not answering the question very well. So, I think what can be applied is this idea of the need for a really clear sense of purpose. And in particular, really understanding and ensuring that all your people understand what is it that is your nation's brand. What is it that you really do for the world that no one else does? And I think you've got basically a brilliant set of nation branding tools available. And a brilliant set of themes around tolerance, around diversity, around innovation and the future, which are really powerful. And the important thing is to bring those together in a very clear, coherent way that everyone at all the embassies in the Emirati network understands and can articulate and can go out and promote. What doesn't work so well, I would suggest that you're better placed to answer the question in a way. I think some of the risks that I was able to take on social media would be trickier to take here. I think that there would inevitably be more message discipline, let's say, and that if you had an ambassador going slightly rogue and making it up a little bit too much, I don't think that would be hugely supported. So I think that's the bit of it. I think you can do the campaigns really effectively, but you probably can't take so many risks. I used to always say the great thing about Twitter was it was about picking arguments. And I would go out and pick arguments with Bashar al-Assad, and pick arguments with Hezbollah. I'd have those fights online. I think a UAE ambassador would probably tread a bit more carefully. That's not, but by the way, that's not something that some of the leadership can be quite tough on social media. If you look at the leadership of Lebanese Zayed uses Twitter, it's very assertive, it's very strong.
Mr. Ambassador, despite all the chaos we have in Lebanon and the civil war and whatever happened in regards to all the situation that we are facing nowadays, what makes Lebanon survive? I mean, as an ambassador, with coming after experiencing 4 years with the Lebanese society and politician, what makes us survive? I mean, this question, we always question it as Lebanese. We don't have a financial stability. We don't have a stability in any sect. A political stability. We are surrounded by wars all around. And yet, we are surviving. As a politician, what made us survive?
So there are two ways of answering this one. One is the positive one, and it's true, which is to say that the Lebanese people just have this extraordinary resilience. They're just able to respond to events. The famous cliches about the fact that as soon as the bombs start falling, the Lebanese are all straight back in the mosque or the church or the nightclub, within 5 minutes. There's something in the Lebanese DNA which is about being outward-looking, being aware of what's going on in the world, being kind of a nation of pioneers and dreamers and poets, which gives them that resilience. And, it's a place with deep, deep roots. For me, any time I thought I'd worked the world out and understood the world, I'd go to Byblos and just look at the ruins of 19 civilizations, and you'd be reminded, empires rise and fall. And much of that happens through Lebanon. That's the polite answer. Would you like the impolite one as well? Or shall I just kind of keep on the Aish Lubnan? Okay, the less benign reason is money, mafia, and memory. Lebanon survives because people are still making good money, and because so much money flows through Lebanon, and because the Lebanese diaspora has such an effective network from South America to West Africa to Abu Dhabi to London, that there's enough money in the system to keep the model running even when the state is failing so badly. People just work around the state. If there's no electricity, you just buy a bigger generator. Second one was mafia, and whether you love them or hate them, and I'll leave it to the Lebanese to decide which it is, Lebanon is still controlled by a group of 15 to 20 guys, and they are guys, men, who were in charge at the end of the Civil War, who were doing quite well, but I got to know these guys very well. Many of them are great friends. I once got a message from London, by the way. It was the one instruction I ever got from London was, please can you not talk to anyone with blood on their hands? And I said, well, I may as well go home. Like, there's no leader here who doesn't have blood on their hands. But that mafia do play a role in keeping things stable because they're doing well. And so they end up making the deal on the number of parliamentary seats or the electoral law or whatever nonsense bit of politics they've invented that week to kind of keep the whole thing spinning. And then the third one is memory. Money, mafia, memory. Memory, because it's, the last civil war is etched in the memories of the generation that lived through it. They know where this leads if we get it wrong. And there were several times when I felt the Lebanese system kind of look over the cliff again and then pull back because of that memory.
Mr. Ambassador, with your diplomatic hat and your policy hat, I'm curious with the recent, and you've mentioned President Trump on numerous occasions, who's emphasizing hard power over soft power. Would you have supported the strike in Syria reportedly to deter future use of chemical and biological weapons, but I think also to set a different tone from the previous administration on the use of force in the region? So would you have supported that? And what do you think the effects are in the region? And then finally, geopolitically?
So I may have hinted that I'm not a huge fan of, I have huge respect for the office, but as yet I'm not a huge fan of the individual. I worry about the menace presented by his policies on climate change. I worry that having him in office shortens my kids' life expectancy because of the climate change policies. I worry about the inexperience of the guy, though I'm reassured that he's got some good, there are some good people around him like Jim Mattis who can help to deal with that. I worry about the temperament, to be honest, and we haven't really talked much about Twitter, but the 3 o'clock in the morning tweets. I quite like people who use Twitter in an authentic, engaging way. I'm having to recast that feeling in the light of Donald Trump, who's authentic and engaging, but I'm not sure he's actually helping much with the 3 o'clock in the morning tweets. But I do worry about the temperament. I think many of us do have a bit of Donald Trump inside us. That bit of us which is a bit boastful and a bit argumentative, kind of thinks we know everything, is very certain, is obsessed with our popularity and so on. But most of us grow out of that about 3 or 4. And there are checks and balances put around the office and the individual to make sure that that's contained. I'm getting to Syria. All of that notwithstanding, I was happy that morning when he did strike after the chemical weapons attack. It may have been the right policy for the wrong reasons. I don't know. But I think it was the right policy. I think with hindsight, it was a mistake that we didn't do it in 2013. The biggest mistake was setting a red line and then not meeting it. Basically telling, not just Assad, because Bashar al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad, but telling Putin and others that US red lines didn't matter was a mistake. I was very torn at the time, August 2013. I knew that if we hit Syria, it would really undo everything I tried to do in Lebanon. I knew I'd have to evacuate my kids. I'd already evacuated them 2 days earlier in anticipation of a strike. I lived in the middle of an area controlled by Hezbollah. There was no way that we could keep families in town. So I was very torn between my Lebanon objectives and the wider Syria objectives. At the time...
One question on that. Ultimately, was not striking there more successful because ultimately that led to the cooperation that destroyed the bulk of the Syrian chemicals, or at least we thought. So in that case, I agree with you. We were all thought, okay, we set the line, we showed ourselves to be impotent because we didn't react. But consequentially, and shortly thereafter, the cooperation to completely eradicate, or at least the bulk, if not all, of the chemical was a huge success, unprecedented. So it's weird how that worked out. But again, that leads forward to your further answer. So I wanted to benchmark that because I think we all shared your concern, and it was never clear to me if that arrangements were in place before not striking or not. So the strike did not occur as not to jeopardize the bigger objective of destroying all those stockpiles, which is unprecedented.
And I think the Obama administration has not given sufficient credit for the chemical weapons work and the work that Sigrid Kaag did at the UN to remove the bulk of them. One mistake around that strike was, that Roosevelt line. Teddy Roosevelt says, never punch unless you have to, but never punch soft. And we'd got to the point where we were signaling, we're going to punch you, we're going to punch you, we're really going to punch you, we're really going to punch, but it will be a very soft punch. And so that was signaling weakness. And I think, in my experience in the Middle East, people are much more prone to draw much bigger conclusions from a moment like that. My experience in the West is that normally there's much more cock-up than conspiracy in Western foreign policy. A vote goes a certain way in the UK House of Parliament and so on. There's not a great conspiracy. If you're in the Middle East, it's always seen as part of a big plan, a big conspiracy. And in that case, it basically signaled to the allies of Assad, you've got free reign now for a couple of years, until the American election. Who knows what happens after that? But you've got 2 years now where, push on in, and that's what we then saw Putin doing and Iran doing behind their guy, Assad. With the strike this time, my big concern is it wasn't part of a wider strategy. I don't think that someone sat there and looked at the entire strategic implications and then said, right, now we strike and then we do this. And in particular, you can't reassure me, I don't think, that there's a strategy when the State Department's being cut quite so dramatically and when the US development budget is being really cut dramatically. That worries me a lot. Your kind of part C question is really important, though, about the message it sends to more widely on geopolitics. And I think it's currently a positive. I think the message it sends Putin is quite positive, that you're not going to have it all your way from here on. It's going to be a bit surprising, a bit edgy. None of us know quite what he's going to do day to day. And I think it's also an important message for China and for North Korea. And particularly the timing of it while they were sat there eating what we now know to have been a very large piece of chocolate cake.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. It's an honor for me to attend your session. I've been enlightened with your experience. I have 2 questions for you, if I may. I will start with the first one. Quoting yourself, You said the fragile ground situation in Syria. And its reflection on Lebanon. It caused the fragile situation in Lebanon. In your opinion, what do you think is the solution for such fragile situation?
In Syria itself?
In Lebanon.
In Lebanon?
Yes.
At the moment, the solution is to make the politics work, and it's welcome that there is a president now that blockage was resolved. Part of the solution has to be serious international support and financing, not just words in support of Lebanon. I was involved in putting together the February conference in London on supporting Syria in the region, and a lot of people were donating speeches, not donating real practical support. And I think we should hold to account the countries which are just talking at the moment and not delivering practical support. But ultimately, there's a regional issue here which we haven't touched on really today, which is the implications of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And I think, and I understand why, the Obama administration, after the chemical deal, then prioritized the Iran nuclear deal. It was important to take that issue off the table. And I know many people here don't agree, but I think I would defend that deal. But it's important now we get on to the next part of that, which is trying to manage this issue about Iran's wider role in the region and that relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And I struggled in my conversations with my capital to really get across quite how important that dynamic is. So I think I would love it. I would love there to be an envoy, a UN envoy, for example, whose job it was to mediate between Iran and Saudi Arabia on some of these big regional issues.
But there are some international fundings going to the refugee crisis in Lebanon, isn't there?
There's masses of funding,
yes.
And with my old government hat on, I should say that Britain has never spent as much on any other crisis as the funding that we've given to Syria, actually. So there is enormous amounts going in. The EU are doing a lot. If you look at the percentages going in, it's the UK, the EU, UAE, Qatar. You know, a lot of people are really working hard at this, but it's not enough.
Okay, and they're going into education, into infrastructure, into
it's a mixture.
diverse.
I would argue not enough is going to education.
Okay.
But a lot of it is going to immediate relief. There's, humanitarian relief, medicine, shelter. The big refugee camps in Zaatari, for example, in Jordan. There's a lot of finance going in to keep those going. But ultimately, this is sticking plaster until you deal with the fundamental political challenges.
My second question, if I may. You mentioned about the refugee crisis and difficulties. Now, we all know that a lot of Syrian businessmen fled to Lebanon, and they are very wealthy businessmen, and they're under the status of refugee as well. And these people moved their factories to Lebanon, moved their business to Lebanon, and I want to know, was there any involvement plan for them? Because they, like with all these refugees, they rented houses, they benefited the Lebanese economy. We spoke about the negative side of the refugees, but there is a positive side, and I would like to know more about this, because in a study I saw on television the other day, there was more than 600 factories opened in Lebanon from Syrian refugees, and were they involved in the infrastructure and the preparation plans? Were they used? Are they in future plans?
I think it's a really interesting point. I think probably not enough thinking has been done on this point. But I do think that the move of wealthier Syrians to Lebanon has helped to inject cash into the economy and has created some benefits for Lebanon that are quite invisible and not always seen. Yeah, I think it's a small positive in the midst of a lot of negative. But I think the important thing when we're thinking about those who fled Syria is to remember that 2/3 of those who've left are women or children. And so the vast majority of those fleeing Syria are very vulnerable and in need of support. And that's we should focus on them. I do think, though, just to try and find one more small silver lining, and that there will be a really important role for Syrian business leaders, Lebanese business leaders, others from the region in rebuilding Syria at some point. And the international community will get behind that in a big way. And so there is a moment when things start to turn around. But it feels pretty distant, I'm afraid.
We've also from watching the news, and you know, news is always window on your own world, we hear about massive numbers that are being donated to the Lebanese government for the Syrian refugees crisis. And when we hear about the results of these amounts, they're not comparable, they're not compatible. So is it just a media hype, or is it really happening, or? So
there's a lot of cynicism about aid and development in general. And it's not just in Lebanon. If there are any Brits here who now and again had the misfortune to find themselves holding a copy of the Daily Mail, you'll know that there is enormous cynicism in the UK about where the aid money goes, and there's a big constituency that would love to close the whole thing off. So it's not unique to Lebanon. There are lots of myths, though, including in Lebanon. There are lots of myths. Not a penny of the British money going into Lebanon went to the Lebanese government. So this stuff wasn't being stolen by Lebanese government ministers. Our money all went through the big NGOs, through the UN, through others that we were working with on the ground. And a lot of it had a real impact. So, for example, in my last year in Lebanon, we got 200,000 kids into school who weren't in school at the beginning of the year. And that's a massive undertaking, and a very expensive undertaking, and involved cooperation with Elias Boussab and the Education Ministry, who were actually one of the most effective ministries. But we weren't, I can reassure you, we weren't just handing the money and then sitting back and watching it disappear into bank accounts. Great. Grab me afterwards and I can tell you some more stories, just so we can broaden it out again.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. And yes. Arabic? Okay, I'd like to ask you a question about if Bashar al-Assad goes or gets toppled, okay, what do you think will happen to Syria? Do you think it will just be chaotic like Iraq or like any other country? If Bashar al-Assad goes now, okay, so what will happen to Syria? I think it will be like chaotic like Iraq.
I mean, I think, and those of you from Syria may disagree with me, I think it's pretty chaotic already, particularly if you're in Aleppo or Homs and other regions. I mean, beyond chaotic at the moment. But it's an important point. It's an important point that you can't just kind of knock one system out and then sit back and hope it will be okay. And I think that's one of the lessons that we really should learn from Iraq, is the danger of intervening and pulling back, then intervening and pulling back, and not sticking around and doing the nation building that is needed. But just, and you always have to be very careful making any comparisons with Nazi Germany and Second World War. And I'm not making that direct comparison, but at the end of the Second World War, no one was saying we need to leave Hitler in office just in case the alternative is chaos. You know, often there is a leader who is doing such terrible things, in this case, in Assad's case, against his own people, that the alternative, I believe, will be better. But what I'm not saying is just everything will be instantly fine. It takes a real process, and it will need proper international support, a proper political process, and people to stick around. But I do not believe, having met loads of Syrians, I do not believe there's only one man qualified to lead that country.
سعادة السفير بالعربي بتكلم أنا. I will speak in English, but I know my English is broken English يعني. سعادة السفير أهلا وسهلا فيك. أنا سعيدة بوجودك في صالون الملتقى. أنا تعرف إحنا في دولة الإمارات عايشين مبدأ صاحب السمو الشيخ خليفة وصاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد وصاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد. دائما نحن عندنا عام الخير السنة وعندنا عام السعادة والإيجابية والطاقة الإيجابية. دولة الإمارات دائما تفكر إن كيف تخلق جو عائلي محب من بين السلطة ومن بين الشعب. نحن ما عندنا مشكلة بين الحكومة ومن بين الشعب، في دائما علاقة محبة وعلاقة مودة، والشعب دائما يحاول يرضي الحكومة. بس أنا مثل ما قريت عن سيرتك الذاتية بالإنترنت أمس أن أنت كنت تمثل الدبلوماسي، كنت أول تمثل الملكة جلالة الملكة، وبعدين أنت كنت تفكر أن تمثل الشعب. أنت حضرتك تقول أن الدبلوماسية لازم تتغير، وجهة الدبلوماسية يكون الدبلوماسي يمثل الشعب ما يمثل الحكومة. بهالوضع وحضرتك تكلمت عن التواصل الاجتماعي ممكن يؤدي دور الدبلوماسي، بس التواصل الاجتماعي هدم، يعني في التواصل الاجتماعي في بعض المجتمعات هدمت لأن في أفكار الإرهابيين، أفكار المخربين، أفكار اللي تدمر أكثر ما هي تبني العقول. شو الحل إذا نحن قلنا أن التواصل الاجتماعي هو الحل لخلق نكسر تحدي الدبلوماسية بين الشعوب وان حلول تجي، بس لما تجي قانون في الدولة تمنع أي إنسان يتكلم على تويترز أو يتكلم على انستغرام، لأن هذا مضر للمجتمع. يعني في يصير إن الإنسان يعيش بين تضاد بين هل هو يتبع أفكارك اللي هي تنادي فيها أن الدبلوماسية لازم تكون عن طريق التواصل الاجتماعي، أو أن بعد ممكن التواصل الاجتماعي يؤدي إلى خراب المجتمعات. ما في حلول، يعني صارنا من 2011 لحد الآن نحن في دمار في دمار في دمار في دمار. ما هو الحل؟ يعني نحن صالون الملتقى يؤمن بالثقافة، يؤمن بالموسيقى، يؤمن بالأدب، لأن هذا الوحيد اللي ما في حدود. الخطوط الزرقاء مش موجودة، الحدود مش موجودة، ترسيم مش موجود. طيب نحن لازم نعيش أمل حق للمستقبل، والمستقبل موجود بإيدكم، يعني بإيد الدول الكبيرة، يعني هي المسيطرة على العالم كله. طيب شو الحل أن يكون توافق بين الدول الكبيرة والدول الضعيفة لحل الإنسانية؟ يعني شو هو الحل للإنسانية؟ لأن إذا في حل الإنسانية ما في أسلحة تنباع ولا في المستفيد. دائما بين الحروب في مستفيد وفي غير مستفيد. الشركات اللي تبيع أسلحة وجاية تستفيد من مشاكل، وإذا حلينا المشاكل خسرت الشركات الثانية. يعني هي قضية شائكة. ما هو الحل؟
Really important points. I mean, so three questions now, I think, which are really important. This really interesting issue around authority and diplomacy, and who do ambassadors and diplomats represent? And in that respect, within my own system, my views are not typical. And I should tell you an odd story that in my whole book, which had all sorts of interesting stories and things about leaders, and there's more in there about Berlusconi and so on than most people have the stomach for. The one section in my book that was challenged by my government, where they wanted to remove it, was the section you mentioned, where I talked about, does a diplomat really represent just, in my case, Her Majesty? I was Her Majesty's ambassador. I was very proud of that. I was delighted to represent her. I was delighted to have a powerful female boss. And she was, that was a key part of my role. And the celebration we put on for her Jubilee year in 2012 was one of the things I was most proud of. But I also felt that in reality, you're representing Her Majesty's government. I was the government's representative. And most of what I was doing was working with David Cameron as the Prime Minister, with the Foreign Secretary. The Queen wasn't calling me up every day and saying, please go and tell the President this, even if there had been a President. So there's that wider role. And the more sort of unusual view that I developed was that actually you are representing your people as well. I felt it was important for me to promote David Beckham, Adele, to sell Bentleys, to sell Scottish salmon and Panadol, and promote British culture and creativity and values more widely, and support the Brits when they were coming out to Lebanon or getting into trouble. That seemed to me a no-brainer. But that is a more controversial view. And I think it's a contested space. Clearly, as a diplomat, your formal role is representing your leader to the other leader. But there's a lot of other stuff that you do as well. And we could argue that on the course, we argue it almost every week. Your second point, I think a really important point about social media, is it basically a threat or an opportunity? It's both. It's a massive opportunity to collect information, to engage with people, and I believe to influence people in new ways. I've no doubt about that. I've seen it happening in my experience in Lebanon. But it is also a threat. And the reality is at the moment that the wrong guys are winning on this. If you look at the way that people are being radicalized, if you look at fake news, if you look at, and when I say radicalized, I don't just mean in this region, by the way. If you look at the way people are being radicalized in Europe and America and elsewhere as well, through social media, there's clearly a huge threat there. There's also a large amount of this which is just a distraction, because people are, and who's got phones out now? For better or worse, people may be looking at cute cats falling off a sofa, or Justin Bieber's latest hairstyle. There's a lot of stuff on here which just distracts us from more useful things, maybe. But I do believe, and this really comes to your wider point, that's all the more reason for trying to develop more creativity, more culture, more content on here, trying to use these to fix global problems, which is what I was trying to do with the UN. We're looking at how to use artificial intelligence to do a peace process, how to use drones to deliver humanitarian support after a crisis. There's a lot there that we can tap into, and basically, I'm afraid, we have no choice. A member of the Jordanian monarchy said to me, "We just wish we could switch off the internet." We can't. If you build a wall around the internet, someone will build an internet around the wall. It's with us. And we can either leave this space to the bad guys, in particular the radicalizers and others and the fake news folk, or we can get in there and get stuck in, roll our sleeves up, and try and create more engaging, interesting content. It's something that we're currently talking to Her Highness Sheikh Lubna about. Content that makes people feel more tolerant, more understanding, more excited about cultural partnerships. Content that, is about rooms like this and can displace the more negative content. And then I think there was a final thought on your point about weak countries and strong countries. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here. But don't overestimate the power of the countries that you think are powerful, and don't underestimate the power of the countries that you think are weaker. I've come out of government, and a Western government, because I was frustrated at the limits of what I could do, the limits of how I could make change on issues that I cared about. And the reality is that power is shifting. It's shifting south, and it's shifting east. It's shifting away from governments and towards individuals. And that shift will only accelerate. In the next century, we will go through as much technological change as in the last 43 centuries. I won't go into the detail of that, but trust me on that, which is like going from cave paintings to the nuclear weapon in a couple of generations. And that will put many ideas out of business, many businesses out of business. It's going to change absolutely everything. And it's up to us as humans whether we react confidently and positively to that, or whether we hide away.
Ambassador Tom, we're very pleased to have you here. I have two questions for you. The first one is, how do you describe your experience at EDA, especially with the young UAE diplomats? And the second one, do you think that North Korea will start a new nuclear war?
Thank you. So the first one is probably slightly easier than the second. So I think a lot of people I bump into find it slightly curious that I've turned up in Abu Dhabi working with Emirati diplomats. They kind of think, well, what's going on there? The reality is that and it comes back to the point about strong states and weak states. I think that countries like UAE are going to be playing a much, much more important role in diplomacy in the years to come. Partly because of the retreat of traditional powers, the fact that, you know, if you're in Britain at the moment dealing with Brexit and so on, you're not going to have so much time to run around trying to sort out world problems. So there's a space there, there's a vacancy for rising powers like the UAE to play much more of a role in diplomacy. And so I believe that the diplomats being trained here, at least 2 of you here today, are going to be on that front line. You know, I'm willing to take a prediction that an Emirati woman will be the UN Secretary General within the next 25 years. I'm willing to come back and let's meet in 25 years' time. I'm giving myself a chance here. 25 gives me a bit more time. Well, there are some who are maybe not far off. You're right. So I think it really matters that that generation of diplomats coming through have great training and the best possible start. And then when we have a nuclear war, are we all doomed? I don't think so overall. But I do note that when Boris Johnson, the British Foreign Minister, met his US counterpart last month, 90%, 9/10 of the conversation was about North Korea, which compared to 3-4 years back when I was in Downing Street, we weren't talking about North Korea at all. So this is worrying people at the very highest levels. But as you've heard, I'm a bit idealistic, I'm a bit optimistic, and I think that diplomacy can win this one, inshallah.
Inshallah. Ladies and gentlemen, I had been just told by my colleagues that we are running out of time, but with a passionate speaker like the Excellency, I think we can continue on and on. It had been a great pleasure. Okay. Then the last chance. We have a last question. And Iraq, okay. Oh, you have it. Okay, please.
Okay. Your Excellency, I just want to touch on one subject. When you mentioned that we tend in the Middle East to think of conspiracy. Well, I tend to disagree a bit. Not that we don't, we do, but having spent so much time here amongst us, do you really blame us for this mentality? You know, as a Palestinian, from 1917, I read a lot about Palestine because I was not born in Palestine. I was born in Jordan. But my family, they come from Palestine. And then I was brought up in a house where I was told that my country was given on a silver platter to Israel. And we had to just evacuate and leave our country. And I believe to resort to the idea of a conspiracy is very bad. And usually people who don't read much and who are not very, educated and other, they do resort to that. But I believe resorting to conspiracy is far more better than resorting to assumptions that Iraq has chemical weapons, so we hit Iraq. I don't know if you disagree with me or not.
I think you make a very powerful point, actually. And conspiracies wouldn't exist. Conspiracy theory wouldn't exist if there hadn't been some conspiracies at some point. By the way, thank you very much for calling me Excellency. I'm an ex-Excellency, so I don't count as an Excellency anymore. I'm a recovering ambassador. But way back, when I was 18 or 19, my first ever job was I was a school teacher in Palestine. So I learnt my Arabic, not quite good enough, which is why I had to listen to headphones just now. I learnt my Arabic in Palestine. Believe me, this is a conversation that I've had, you can imagine. And when I was doing events at universities in Lebanon, I used to always say to my team, okay, put the stopwatch on and we'll have a bet as to when Sykes-Picot first comes up, when Balfour first comes up, with good reason. You know, these are, you know, the sad thing is you wouldn't find many British school children who actually understand these issues, who know the history. Whereas every school child in Palestine knows that history. We can argue for hours over which bits of it are fair and which bits aren't. I won't do that now, because I think your point is powerful and very legitimate. And all I'd say is, let's not assume that the great powers have either the same motivations as they had 100 years ago, at a time when, you know, let's face it, you know, the Brits were in a very different position in the world, and we don't have the same power that we had then. And we certainly, you know, the time when much of these conspiracies were being enacted, we were on our knees. We had just finished fighting the Second World War. You know, there were mistakes in there, without doubt. And I think we're far enough away from it now that we can recognize that, you know, we didn't cover ourselves with glory the whole time. But we're a very different country now. You know, I was born in 1975. You know, we've moved on a lot, but we mustn't forget the past. And do please go and have a look at my blog, where I write lots and lots about Palestine, about my relationship with the Palestinian veterans in Lebanon, who I'd meet all the time, you know, and about conspiracy. In fact, there's a blog called Conspiracy and Independence about this very issue.
We're expecting a question from Iraq. We got Iraq already? Okay. Okay, so we are really... I would like to thank our brilliant, passionate speaker. It has really been very interesting. As you can see, we say in the Arab world that we are all born politicians. So the discussion can go on and on like this without stopping. I know many of our audience here will still meet you outside to continue the discussion, which is very interesting. Me, myself, I have a lot to tell you still. But in this hour, I will say, despite my first-hand disappointment and pessimistic, yes, you convinced me to a certain degree to rethink about it and revisit my own convictions with regard to the system and digital. Thank you very much. Thank you, Multaqa, and thank you to the book fair.